Now to a heartwarming story in more ways than one. Joining me is Luke Griffin, a young man whose passion for cycling, and is a proud member of the Cumara Cycling Club. His dad, Paul, who's also a bit of a cyclist, and Karen, who's a heart of gold to be putting up with their cycling exploits. From the Williamstown Road here in the city, Luke can be seen nearly every day out and about on his bike. Firstly, Luke, how old are you?
I'm 17.
You're in school or just left? Or
De La Salle, just finished transition year. About to go into fifth year, unfortunately.
How did transition year go?
Pretty good. A lot of spare time in terms of like not having homework. I could spend more time with training and.
Mammy and Daddy are shaking the head here. All the spare time you had. One of your big passions is cycling. How much do you love cycling?
It's kind of the only thing I do. I don't do much outside of cycling or school. It's kind of just. It's my whole life kind of revolves around. I've been doing it since.
He's dedicated.
Where does your obsession come from?
I suppose watching my dad race when I was younger. We used to travel around the country every Sunday or so just to watch him race, and kind of got a bit of a buzz watching it, like seeing fellas fly past it. So, and I always had like a little bike when I was younger, so I'd love flying around the street. And I guess just one year I just wanted a racing bike and got it for Christmas, and it kind of took off from there. Like.
Karen, do you remember getting him the racing bike?
We do. He was tiny. It was tiny, the bike. I didn't realise it could come so small as a racing bike. But his face Christmas morning was priceless when we got it, and we just haven't been able to keep him off the bike since.
And Paul, is he a better cyclist than you ever were?
At under 12, Damien, he was better than I ever could be. Yeah, no, I'd be a cyclist who likes to ride the bike fast. I'd consider Luke to be a racer. He loves the aggression of attacking the bike and being in a group and racing them. So, yeah, infinitely better.
Where did your love of cycling come from?
I'd never say love. My first start was running, but after years of doing that, the legs packed up. So back in the early 2000s, I took up the cycling to keep the weight off. Something to do at the weekend rather than housework, and it grew from there.
When Luke was born,
yes.
Karen, tell us, what little bundle of joy was he?
Well, he was a gorgeous little bundle of joy, but unfortunately we weren't able to hold our bundle of joy when he was born.
How difficult was the pregnancy?
The pregnancy was good, Damien. I had no real issues through the pregnancy. We were worried throughout because our previous child, Adam, had been born at 32 weeks. He was premature, and I'd had a lot of difficulties. So we were monitored very regularly by Dr. Birmingham. And the pregnancy was fine, but again during labour there were difficulties, and Luke had to be born through an emergency section.
Paul, when you're in the hospital and Karen is giving birth and you're expecting, okay, everything is going to be great, and Luke is taken away from you, and talk through to me that moment of, oh God, is there something wrong?
Thanks, Damien. That was never going to be easy after Adam, because the trauma of going through a premature birth at 32 weeks, 3 pounds 10 ounces, and watching him in an incubator. So I didn't take anything for granted. We had been well cared for by John Birmingham, and so when Luke went the full term and he came out, yes, relief. Karen then hadn't been under the anaesthetic. I was in the room waiting. They took Luke off to do what they do, and time passed and there's no sign of him coming back. I wasn't concerned. Maybe I should have been, but I wasn't. Ignorance is bliss. And then John came back in and asked if we had met Bet Baby, and we said no, he hadn't. So he said he'd make a phone call to find out. He made this phone call up to the antenatal, and just said he had to go off. He'd come back to us in a couple of minutes. He came back after 5 minutes with some awful news.
Yeah, I was only waking up. He was waking me up from the anaesthetic, really. And he sat on the bed and just... He held my hand and just told me, Karen, there's a problem with Luke, with his heart. And
you just...
simplistically, all he said was he's not pinking up.
Yeah.
He's not pinking up.
So,
yeah. And that was just devastation.
When you heard like the thoughts that go through your mind, there's confusion, there's panic.
There is, and then I was trying to process, it was difficult enough for Paul, but I was still groggy. I was still coming around from an anaesthetic, and I was trying to process, what are you telling me? Where's my baby? He should be here with me now. It was bad enough I had to go through a section a second time, emergency, and I couldn't see my baby. And then we were waiting, and eventually we were told that he was going to have to go to Crumlin, that they couldn't stabilise him here, and everything was too serious.
Paul, at this stage, how would you describe your state?
Lost. Not comprehending.
Yeah.
I suppose you're very defensive of your position in that you should be minding your child. Karen was there. I could see her. Baby had gone. I hadn't come back. Then you hear, he has to go to Crumlin, and we can get to see him for a couple of minutes, and they brought him back up. And we literally only had him for a couple of minutes in the hotbed before they were going to have to take him to the ambulance to bring him straight to Crumlin.
Yeah. We couldn't touch him, or we couldn't hold him. There was nothing. I was lying flat, and they just wheeled in this incubator, which was higher than me. And all I remember thinking was, he's huge, because even though he was so sick, he was a big baby. Compared to Adam, who we had, which was 310. He was 7'11".
He was long.
So, and he was very long.
He was a cyclist.
Yes,
already at that stage.
Well, compared to the 310 we were used to when he was born.
And Karen, were you crying?
I was very upset. I was hysterical, as much as I could be in the bed. And then everybody left me. And that was, there was a whole mixture of emotions, because I was happy my baby was there. He was alive. But he was sick, and then we were told he was dying. And then he was, they couldn't get him into the ambulance to get him to Crumlin, and 3 occasions they had to take him back again to revive him in order to try and get him into the ambulance. And all of this was happening, and then eventually he was going in the ambulance, and everybody left me, and I was lying in the room on my own because they all went to the ambulance. And
this was all going on in the background. So while we were quite obsessed with where we were, all this running around in the background of Luke need to be revived, need to go to the ambulance, need to come back, can't make it.
Yeah.
And
have you heard all this before, Luke?
I've heard a few stories, but yeah, it's kind of
never as detailed as this.
No, this is the first.
This is the first time for you as well.
So he was born about 10:20, and by 6 o'clock that evening they had him stabilised enough that they could get him in an ambulance to get to Crumlin. So that's where we had 8 hours of. I was numb, really. Yeah, trying to, because we had Adam, who was 5. So here he was waiting for his little brother to come along. Next he's told he can't see him. Karen, who was coming around after the section, and then all family waiting to come around to see this new baby. It was tough to wave him, not to wave him goodbye, but to see him going out the doors into the back of an ambulance.
Not knowing if we were going to see him alive.
Yeah.
Or how we were going to see him again.
Mm.
And then Paul had the awful decision. Well, not awful decision, but there was turmoil, because he was going to go to Crumlin in Dove. There was no question. Somebody had to be with Luke, and he wasn't going to be on his own. So I wasn't allowed to go at the time. But
Luke, the idea that you were revived as a 1-day-old baby, it's a strange thing to think about, isn't it?
It feels pretty cool. No one had all that attention around me straight away. It's kind of nice.
And things haven't changed.
You're up and down you go to Crumlin. They
that evening,
work on him.
Yeah, that evening they actually give him another hole in the heart to allow the blood. Leaving cert biology it kicks in. You have a mild understanding of what's going on. So they gave him an extra hole in the heart to allow greater mixing between the blood, which enabled him to breathe on his own, even though he was on a hotbed, keeping him warm with oxygen. He was able to support himself, but that wasn't a long-term solution. He had to have an operation.
If somebody thinks of a heart, their image now is something they'll see in a book, or they'll see in that movie Rat Race or something like that. They're throwing the heart out. The size of a baby's heart. How small is it?
It's the first finger, the index finger, fold it over, and it's the size of a walnut.
A walnut.
So you've got 4 chambers plus all of the tubes, arteries and veins coming from it. So size of a walnut.
So the surgeon's having to work on a thing the size of a walnut.
Yeah.
That is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
We were lucky we had the best working on him. We had Professor Mark Redmond, and he does an awful lot of work in America and everywhere. I mean, he is top, and thank God we had him work on Luke.
And those first few days, the first week, touch and go at different times, but he was being stabilised.
Yeah, Paul would know the first few hours, as I said, because I was down here and he was up there watching all of it. But
yeah, the next morning I went to Dublin because they needed, obviously, one of the parents, so Karen wasn't in condition to travel. And I met with the consultant who did the basic heart drawing and showed me exactly what they had discovered when they did all the scans on Luke the previous night, and then what they were going to have to do to correct it. And that's when I asked, what size organ are we dealing with? And that's when I got that, and it was quite scary. But there was the confidence that came back from them was, I wasn't concerned because of the detail.
What we hadn't realised through the pregnancy was that he had a congenital heart defect. And really, he had a couple of holes in his heart. He had a coarctation of the aorta, which is where the aorta is narrowed and doesn't leave the blood flow through very easily. And then he also had transposition of the major vessels, which in short they call switch. So the heart really is backwards. All the valves and everything are all in the wrong place.
When did you get told that he was going to be okay?
Oh, well, it was up and down, because at 10 days he had the major heart surgery, where the open heart surgery, they cracked open the chest and they corrected the valves and rejigged everything basically, and the holes in the heart. And after that, we thought that was it. He was coming round, and he gave them a fright in surgery. They couldn't get him off bypass, so we had a fright too. We were back to the theatre. You're told to go back for whatever time they'll be finished. You go back. You're sitting there. Nobody comes near you, and then the liaison officer comes and says, they're delayed. We'll go off again and we'll come back again. And this went on. So we realised eventually, and they were told us they couldn't get him off bypass easily. So then he did come back. He was grand. He was just causing trouble again.
You're smiling there, Luke.
Causing lots of trouble.
A week later, well, not even a week later, we thought he was doing well. He was starting to come around a little bit. And then Paul came home to see Adam, who had gotten sick down here, and probably a mixture of missing his parents and his brother, and a little bit of what's happening. So Paul came home to visit him and see how everything was, and he was only gone an hour, and this new doctor arrived into intensive care and called me outside and told me that Luke had less than 50% chance of survival. And I kind of, they just put it that way, as if I knew something was coming. And I just said, I don't understand. He's okay after the operation. He's coming round. He's getting better. But he had contracted, and now to remember it, it's neck is the short word for it, but necrotitis. Can you remember it?
No.
Basically, it's flesh eating. It eats your organs. It's a bacteria that eats away.
It's bacteria in the gut that is displaced when you're on bypass. So
it affects a lot of elderly people and very young who would have problems. And of course, he did contract this. And I asked you, okay, well, what can we do? What's the treatment? What are you going to do for him? And the answer was starvation. So there was nothing that they could do to treat it except starve him. And the child had only started to actually take, his food through the tube because of how sick he had been. So he was only starting to put on a little bit of weight after losing it. It was just as well he was 7'11". He had gone down to just 5 pounds. And then they were going to starve him again, because that was the only way, was to starve the actual bacteria and hope that it would go. And
how long did that take?
Into the second day.
Yeah.
It was long overnight of 100% monitoring. The doctor was by his bed in the intensive care unit for solid 24, 28 hours, checking his signs all the time, which was
watching,
just monitoring. And then probably at the 36th hour, you could see his relaxing as the numbers started to show what he was looking from them. So it was another hazy day.
Yeah.
As you managed to get him back then?
Yes.
And managed to get him back home?
Yeah.
After obviously weeks and months of monitoring.
He was born on the 9th of April and we took him home on the 9th of May. So in all of the turmoil and the absolute trauma and that he went through, as well as us, it actually, he was good enough. We came home after a month. And then he created mayhem at home again because he wouldn't take his bottles and we had to give him medication all the time and monitor. We had to write down, keep a strict diary of how much fluids he took, when he would pee, what soiled nappies, everything. We had to do the whole lot.
We'll be back in a quick second.
Déise Today with Damien Tiernan on WLR.
Thanks to Mulligan's. Blue Club rewards from mulliganspharmacy.com. Spend a little to earn a lot. Every time I think I'm voting, I know you're voting too. There's no doubt you're voting.
Déise Today with Damien Tiernan on WLR.
With thanks to mulliganspharmacy.com. Life's a beach with Mulligan's Pharmacies. Open late on the Dunmore Road and in Tramore.
Welcome back to the programme. Keep your texts coming in. 083 3333 975. Some news this morning. Some good news for the port. BG Freightline, in partnership with Maersk, is starting a new weekly service on the Waterford-Rotterdam route, act as a deep sea feeder business in Ireland. Some fabulous news there for Waterford Port at Bellevue. Now, you're listening to me talking with Luke Griffin and his mum and dad, Karen and Paul. We've been talking about the amazing story of Luke and how he's going to be taking part in the prestigious Junior Tour of Ireland in Clare next month in cycling. Can I ask you folks, when Luke was growing up, did you have to curtail his activities, or was he just another young child and teenager with a dodgy ticker?
Yeah. Well, yes. Initially when you took him home, it was like cotton wool. I was terrified. I'd do something wrong. I was terrified I'd miss something and that something would go wrong and I wouldn't see. I would have nights where I would cry in bed when I would try to feed him because he wouldn't take the bottle. And I was, they had said, if he won't take the bottle, you have to bring him back to hospital, it's serious. And I would cry at him, pleading with the child, and he looking up at me, please take your bottle, I have to take you back to hospital. And I suppose for a short while, a couple of months maybe, I was very much the cotton wool person, wasn't I? I was terrified and I would wrap him up a little bit. But then you have to realise he's not. He is a child, he's a normal baby. I just have to treat him like you treated the other and watch him. He's been monitored by the doctors, and you know if something's wrong with your baby.
It's that cliche that it's every parent's worst nightmare to have a sick child, Paul, but the stress that it puts parents under. Immense,
and you don't ever feel it going. Because, like you said, when does it change? It never really changes. You learn to live with it, you learn to adapt to it, but you're always aware of what he went through, his special start. So you're grateful in a lot of ways, but you don't say that out loud.
Even now, every year when we go for our checkup to Crumlin, he still has a yearly. Luke's always going to have checkups, even into adulthood. When we have to stop bringing him, he goes himself. But at the moment, we're still attending Crumlin yearly, and I always find myself sitting in the waiting room up there, going, "Oh, we have to get the ECGs and everything done. What if something's after going wrong? What if something has..." And it's only fleeting. It's just when you're waiting and you're watching that, the ECG going on and the echo, and you're just...
Luke, as you were growing up, what are you aware of? What are Mammy and Daddy telling you about your heart?
It was kind of just kept really simple. I was told that I had heart problems when I was born, that it was an upside down heart. That was, at a young age, it was kept simple that my heart was upside down. So I always kind of knew then why I had the scars, because obviously seeing them would kind of make me wonder, well, why do I have these scars? So it was kept simple with, I had an upside down heart. So I was, for a lot of the time, very unaware as to what had actually gone on. Like I said, it's a simple thing of, I was just sick when I was born.
And do you still have the scars?
Unfortunately, yes.
And did you have to not partake in certain sports, or?
No, I was kind of allowed to try as I pleased. I've tried a few sports. I tried basketball, swimming, hurling, football, you name it. It just never really stuck with me. The only thing I ever found an actual passion for was cycling, and unfortunately it was one of the toughest sports in the world in terms of how much pressure it'll put your heart and your whole body under. But I think it's kind of ironic to me how when I was born my heart was really weak and I could have died, and now I can perform at 205 beats per minute, about to completely blow up with my legs with the pain grinning. There's not a problem in my heart now.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal. Yeah, look, if you're thinking about it, it is quite big. Like I easily forget about how big it is, because obviously I wouldn't have known. I wouldn't know the drama or anything that had gone on when I was born, because it was happening to me. I would have been completely unaware. So I'm always going off of stories, and I don't quite fully understand how serious it actually was. Like, I'll have a rough idea, but I'll never understand how serious my problem was. So, like, again, you can use the religious phrase a miracle baby, but a scientific miracle. But scientists and medicine combining to the utmost degree to do the job and do an unbelievable job. Yeah, no, I am very lucky to just be sitting here now. Like,
a skill set that you could only imagine was what has him here today.
And that is the reason that you're doing this cycle.
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
It's what he can.
It's the Junior Tour of Ireland. It's 6 days of racing with some of the best juniors in the world. The ones that'll make you rethink how you're training, like, how much more will I have to do to be able to beat these guys? But it's 6 days of racing flat out. I think the shortest stage we have is 50 or something K, and that's the shortest. The rest will be close to 100, if not over 100. It'll be 2.5 hours of racing essentially every day, of eyeballs out, having your heart and soul broken just to finish in a group.
For 17 and 18 year olds, these aren't men, these are young men.
And have the doctors told you, obviously they've said to you, you're 100% grand to do this?
We haven't.
We didn't seek their opinion, but they've never.
If they're listening to this now,
yeah, he's never been told not to do anything.
Yeah.
No, his consultant
is fully aware.
Is fully aware of what he does and is fully on board and thinks it's great that he is doing it. I suppose without the wording, he said, if anything is to happen, he's doing something he loves. So, it's kind of, but it's not going to, because he's so healthy and he's so fit, and we have gotten him and he is where he is. Sometimes he's had a few episodes, maybe he was feeling faint off the bike, or struggling once or twice in races. And when we spoke to the consultant, he just said sometimes the heart won't go as fast as you want it to, when you want it to.
And that probably can happen to a lot of different cyclists at different stages, can it? That idea of just being so tired.
The only residual he has is that he has a very slight heart murmur. That's all.
So it's just something to monitor.
So it's exactly it. It's monitored and well cared for. And
how can people help out, like in terms of Crumlin, in terms of how can people help out regarding this race? Is there anything to...
It's not. This is an actual race. It's not a fundraiser or a charity. I did a charity fundraiser for that back in 2006, which is probably where his intimate love of biking came from. But this is
an actual race.
An actual race based in Clare for the 6 days from Tuesday the 9th of July. Some really hard roads, really hard winds coming in off the Atlantic. Teams coming from France, Scotland, Isle of Man, America. A couple of teams come over from America, and many teams for Ireland, Irish teams, provincial teams, club teams.
How proud are you?
Immensely.
Words can't describe how proud we are of him.
Sometimes I can't shut up, but I struggle for words in this, because since he was aware of bike riding and bike racing at 8 years of age, and he heard then about the Junior Tour, he said to me, I'm going to do it. And I didn't doubt his determination because we are at loggerheads quite often. But whether he was going to be able to take the rigours of it,
Yeah.
I hoped, but I was never certain.
And we're here.
It's amazing.
And 3 weeks to go, and he'll be there.
It is amazing, Karen.
It is, and his dedication, Damien, is what I'm so impressed with all the time. He's out riding his bike, and he trains 6 days out of 7. And he's out for 3 hours, 4 hours, 2.5 hours, depending on his programme. And he does it, and he gets up and he goes to a gym to stretch once a week with me, and he stretches at home. And he has all of this. He monitors his food intake, and he's just so dedicated. And this year, he really has put everything into the junior tour. He's waited for this, as Paul said. And
does he do anything wrong? Like, does he curse?
Oh,
is his socks smelly and all that? Does he keep his room tidy?
They're all over the floor.
It was a mess.
I don't know. Oh, no, the sun doesn't rise and shine, Damien.
No, it doesn't.
But we started a rule when we were going to ride together was what happens on the bike stays on the bike. So he can vent and say what he needs to me, use any word he wants, but once he gets off the bike, it's...
And it is a tough sport, and it's only if you actually go and watch a cycle race, a proper cycle race, if you stand on the sideline and you watch what they go through and what they have to do and the distances that they cycle. It's easy to watch people, playing football, playing basketball. I've gone to all these sports and I've stood on the sidelines with Adam and with them doing different sports, but this is out on its own, and you have no idea what a cyclist actually has to go through. It looks quite easy just sitting on a bike pedalling. It's not.
Luke, you're feeling good about it? Looking forward to it? I'm
pretty excited for it now. It's training specifically for the junior tour started back in October. Everything you do kind of has a knock-on effect. So if you don't put in like winter's training is long, steady miles, build up your endurance, so you can go for long races. So my entire winter was spent with 3.5 hour spins. Now and then maybe going 4 hours if the spin just took me a small bit longer, but that was Saturday and Sundays were just spent with 3 hours on the bike just pedalling, with the odd turbo session in midweek in the rain, unfortunately at times, kind of lose finger in your feelings. But it all then changes then once the summer comes around. Your training gets shorter, it gets harder, and week by week, race by race, you get that bit closer to the junior tour. So naturally you're kind of thinking it's finally here. I've waited this many months, I've been putting this many hours in on the bike. My time is about to come to suffer for a week straight and see how much I can give it.
The best of luck.
Thank you,
Paul. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Damien.
And you'll be down there in Clare, I presume.
We will.
That's the annual holiday this year.
Yeah. I think actually you did mention earlier about Crumlin. What could people do for Crumlin? Where this isn't a charity event. The charity event was done when we did it way back.
But if anybody is doing fundraisers for Crumlin, it's...
I think so. I mean, we did the charity to give back to Crumlin and say thanks for... Really, thanks. We have Luke here, and it was down to them. And I think, although it's not charity now, Luke is saying thanks and showing them that he's making the best of his life. He's doing what he loves. He's pushing himself to the limits, and he's not going to stop. And he's only here and able to do that because of Crumlin and what they've done, and Waterford Regional and getting him there. Both played, huge parts in his life and in him being here and being able to do this.
And well done to the both of you. Karen, Paul, thank you very much. Luke, with your upside down heart, mind yourself, and the very best of luck.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us in, Damien.